So this next section that we are going to be working on in pre-calculus is rational functions. So what we are going to be doing is learning all about what happens when we have a polynomial divided by a polynomial. We should be able to recognize what a polynomial is. We know that these are two quadratic polynomials. That means the numerator is going to be smooth and continuous. Same thing with the denominator. However, now that we're dividing, we got to be careful of a few things. And when you think about dividing, the big worry that we should always have is dividing by zero. Like, that is bad news. So we are going to find when the denominator is zero. This is bad news. We can't evaluate this function where the denominator is zero. So we should, what we need to do is just take the denominator and set it equal to zero. We do that. And we can solve this pretty quickly. We say 4 equals x squared, therefore plus or minus 2 is x. You could have factored it, you could have done a lot of things. This means that these values of x can be one of two things. They can either be wholes or what are called vertical asymptotes. Okay? So we need to be able to talk about that. They're either wholes or vertical asymptotes. The next thing that we need to do is find our zeros. And that is where this whole function, I shouldn't have drawn that vertical line, where that whole function equals zero. Well, we could cross multiply, and if we do that, x squared minus 4 times 0, that just goes away, so we're just left with that numerator, and that numerator equals 0, so now I'm going to show you. So x squared plus, squared plus 5x plus 6, that equals 0. We look at that, it's a quadratic. We could use the quadratic equation, but we can factor that. That is x plus 3, x plus 2, that equals 0. Therefore, x equals negative 3 and negative 2. Those are my squiggly brackets. So those are our two potential zeros. What we're going to learn is that with negative 2 and negative 2, x equals negative 2 is a whole. Positive 2, this positive 2, x equals positive 2 is going to be a vertical asymptote, and we'll be talking about that in class. And then, lastly, x equals negative 3 is just a 0. All right. The last thing that we need to be able to do is talk about the end behavior of these functions. What happens to these functions as they go off towards positive infinity and negative infinity? We're going to learn a little bit about that. If this numerator gets really, really big, you can imagine that x squared is what's going to matter the most. And same thing with the denominator, it's x squared. And because they're the same, the horizontal asymptote, what happens of this function as it goes towards infinity is it gets closer and closer to 1. Same thing with negative infinity. And again, we're going to be talking about that quite a bit as we go on. So, wholes, vertical asymptotes, zeros, and then talking about horizontal asymptotes, or what happens at infinities, at the infinities. Thanks.